Welcome, you guys. Thank you so much for clicking this video. I am just so excited that you've chosen to hear more of our story. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I'm super pumped that to let you guys in on where we've been at for the last couple years and like with infertility. Initially, we weren't telling people because we wanted to tell everybody we were pregnant rather than it was hard getting pregnant and so it was felt isolating for a little while, but we're just so excited to just let the people we love in on where we've been at the last couple years.
Yeah, and I think my hope with this video is that you could think of what God's maybe doing in your personal story and feel encouraged that even if you haven't arrived at where you're longing to be or hoping for right now, that God is working in all the details. Because like we keep saying like this is our God story, and we feel like God is just working in a lot of really wild ways that we're really unsure of why in certain ways, but we're expectant and we're excited to continue the story and see kind of where he leads us.
So where the story kind of begins is about 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, we started trying to have kids, and we were really excited, as you know, most people are when you step into that season, and it was pretty wild. For like the first week, like we started trying, we started getting calls out of the blue from different people here and there, calling saying like, "Hey, we had a dream you were pregnant. This is crazy. It felt so real." And like it was nonstop. It just felt like we were getting calls all the time from different people of like, "Hey, I just had a dream you were pregnant." And it was like kind of crazy because we didn't get that before we started at all, and it began like the week we started trying, and it was like kind of just crazy and really and built faith, even in the first few months as we didn't get pregnant, and but it like really built faith in us. And
I have this like note in my phone that's called Faith for a Baby because it started becoming like silly to not write these things down. And it honestly like really, really helped the process to be like, okay, God, I feel like you're like reminding us you're with us in this. You know our desires. And yeah, it's cool. We like still have this note on our phone that just shows us like all of the like Faith for a Baby moments that we had specifically that first year. It's really crazy.
yeah, and for the next 2 years, that note just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yes.
More people calling and saying they've had dreams about us, and so it's
Yeah.
been kind of wild. And that first year was really exciting at the beginning, but then ended up being a really challenging year because we kept getting these dreams about people saying we were pregnant, but then every month was felt like another disappointment. Um, and then to add on top of that, I was traveling out of state constantly, which made it that much harder to be away that much in the midst of going through this really hard thing. And so that first year, man, was really challenging. And that's when, after a year, was when we decided to go to the doctor and kind of see what was going on.
Yeah, and to be honest, like going to the doctor is my biggest fear. I feel like obviously you have a ton of people around you in this season at this age, like going through different things. And so my first instinct was like something is horribly wrong. And I honestly wouldn't be shocked if it was. I was kind of like growing an apathy of just like, of course this would be it, like just getting so negative. And I feel like those were moments we had to go back to that like note and like go to the Lord and just be like, okay, Lord, like we really trust that you know us and you know the plans that you have for us. And so we went to the doctor. It was like really scary. But we ran all the tests and literally everything was totally fine. In fact, it was like beyond what they would expect. And we're like, everything looks amazing. And we're like, okay, well, this is like really confusing. But the cool thing is, one of the biggest prayer requests that Tim had as he was like praying for us as we went into that year mark was like, Lord, if it's going to take longer than we want, would it not be because something's wrong, but because you just have something better in mind? And so when we got that news, as much as it was like really still disappointing, it was like, okay, Lord, thank you for my health. Thank you that we are healthy and we are okay. And so basically we sat in with our doctor and she kind of shared with us what basically we call like the hamster wheel of infertility treatments. And it's essentially just this huge kind of protocol. They say, do this. And if you don't do this, then do this, then you'll have a baby. And you're like, okay, like, don't know anything that I'm doing, but I guess we'll just jump into this, right? Like there's just this weird, overwhelming moment. And I remember after that first appointment, Tim and I went and got burgers, and we were inside the car, just like waiting for our order to come, and we had like the conversation of like, okay, what are we willing to do in this process of fertility treatments, and what are we willing not to do? But then also inviting the Lord in that moment and just feeling like, God, would you steer us in whatever direction you want for our baby? And so as we prayed and as we chatted, we were like, okay, what we're willing to do is about 3 to 4 IUIs. If you don't know what that is, look it up. But 3 to 4 IUIs, and then typically they say to do IVF right afterwards. And for us, as we like prayed and like just talked it out, we were like, okay, what we are willing to do is the 3 to 4 IUIs. For us, like IVF wasn't going to be an option. So we were like, okay, we'll seek after adoption after we get to the end of these IUIs and like us trying for that. And so I remember after we even brought up the adoption thing, we were like, would it be so cool if we could like literally just do both at the same time and see whatever one God brought to us? Because it just felt like, Lord, I am just like so ready to be a mom, so ready to be a dad, and like we want the baby you want for us. But obviously, like if you know adoption, like or IUIs, you can't do that. We'd have to
We
like
didn't know a whole lot.
yeah, we'd have to have a lot of money that we don't have and a lot of mental capacity. But so basically, we said yes to our first round of IUI, which was cool. And so it took a few months before we could start that. And there was something cool that like God was doing in your heart. Do you want to share the dream you had?
Yeah, it was pretty wild because right before we did the first IUI, we did a couple Medicaid cycles, which also, I guess the easy way to put it is it creates more goals to score in. Um, is kind of how the doctors put it to us. But before we went into our IUIs, I had this wild dream about me holding in the room right back there, holding this little baby girl, and it was like unlike any dream I've ever had, and unlike any feeling I've ever had. As in my dream, I held this little girl, and I can like see the face right now, and like I've never felt that feeling, and it really was like, whoa! It was just a wild uh, dream to have, and that was like right before the IUIs.
So we go into our first IUI, and that procedure went well. It was like 20 out of 10 from our doctors. They were like, this looks amazing, so hopeful. We're like, let's do it. But you're also holding, like, they tell you it's a 10% chance. You're like, okay, that's why they tell you to do 4 of them. And so you're like holding both of like filled with hope, but also like totally bracing yourself for impact constantly in this journey. And so after the procedure, we had 2 weeks to wait, and we're like, let's just enjoy it. It's gonna be great. Let's just whatever God has for us, we'll feel it out. And so at one point in those 2 weeks, we were like waiting and just hanging out on the couch, Tim and and I randomly thought about this thing called snowflake adoption, which is like embryo adoption. Essentially, for people that do IVF, sometimes they have more embryos than the amount of babies that they would like to have, and the doctor at the end of their last procedure says like, what do you want to do with these remaining embryos? And if we believe that they're lives, right, like, so that's like a really big deal. And essentially sometimes they put them on ice, sometimes they put them out for science, sometimes they discard them, and sometimes they put them up for adoption, which is so awesome. So I just was like hearing about this for the first time and told it to Tim, and we both were like, that's super epic.
Which
Yes.
it was crazy for me because I just started, you know, tears started coming because for me, it was a huge answer to prayer that she even brought that up because that dream that I had, one of the wild parts about it that I hadn't shared with Haley yet because we were doing these fertility treatments that were expensive and, you know, that we were waiting for so long. And, but the baby very clearly didn't look like us.
Mhm.
Definitely wasn't our blood. And it was like, just such an answer to prayer because I didn't know how to bring that up. It was really hard to wrestle with. It felt like so significant, that dream. But then, yeah, but then it was very clearly like this did not come from us. And so it allowed me to be able to share with her in that moment. And it was just this like really unifying, awesome time, even before
Yeah.
we knew that the IUI didn't work. But we just kind of seemed like, all right, maybe this is where we're heading after these 3 or 4 IUIs.
And we were like laughing because we were like, what if this was what we end up doing? Because we've had these dreams that people give us that I'm pregnant, and then you're having a dream that baby doesn't look like us, and God's clearly pushing us, like that he like wants to build our family in some ways. So we're like, this could be it, but we're also like,
Kind of all collides
but
together.
we're also like waiting for our IUI and like so hopeful about that. And so fast forward like a week and a half later, it was like a few days before I knew like I likely wasn't pregnant. I just was like feeling like I wasn't. I woke up one morning, I was just like bawling my eyes out. Like it was very emotional season, but I was just like different kind of emotional. And after like a few hours, Tim looked at me and was like, is something else triggering you? Like you haven't even started your period yet? Like, is there something weird? And I just like in my tears looked at Tim and I was like, I feel like God is not closing the door to our family. He's just opening the door more obviously to adoption. And that was like such a crazy moment because I, of all people, was like trying to control like all the things that I could be doing to like start our family the way we wanted to do it. And it was so clear, not that God didn't have a biological like child for us at one point, but it was just this like feeling of this like peace of God just saying like I'm reordering your plan. Because at one point we were like, we'll totally adopt when we like have older kids, like that's our plan. But God's like, no, this is like what I have for you now. And so that started our journey of basically canceling your IUIs that we had planned to do if we just didn't keep getting pregnant. And I remember calling our doctor, being like, hey, we're not going to do more IUIs. And she was like, I really think you can get pregnant. Like, I don't know why you're stopping. And it's like so hard to explain to someone that maybe isn't a Christian, but it was like, I don't know how to explain this. I just feel like God has something else for us. And that was when we jumped into embryo adoption.
Yeah, and embryo adoption, we had no idea how to begin. And so we were researching, we were trying to figure out, how do you even do this? And basically we found like Facebook groups that people have done IVF that are trying to adopt out their embryos. We found random agencies that do it. We heard that you can just meet somebody, then if they have embryos, you can adopt the. It's like was it was wild, and we were like trying to call around, trying to figure it out. Everything kind of felt really weird, and it was just like kind of a wild. It was just a weird place to be of like trying to figure out how to do this. And we went to a lot of meetings. Nothing really felt right. But then Haley was asking our fertility clinic of like, hey, is this even possible? Like, can I adopt an embryo through this clinic? And our doctor was like, oh yeah, actually we even have extra embryos from IVF patients. And we were like, oh, like, okay. Well, and we kind of went down the path of like, oh, it'd be a lot easier to go through our own clinic that way because it's a lot of work to even get into a clinic, way more than what we
Yeah.
even it was just tough. It was tough.
And what was crazy is like I remember praying with a friend who like has mentored me, and she had basically like prayed over me like just this phrase of like, God, would you help like Haley and Tim find their baby? Like we have felt this call of adoption, and now we feel called to embryo adoption, but like how do we find like the baby you have for us, God? And it's cool because that was like phrase that Tim had even like felt.
Yeah.
And that would just be kind of became like, Lord, help us find the baby that you have for us. And so that kind of was our language that we used for adoption. So basically we decided to go with our clinic and um essentially adopt one at a time. And basically they had told us one day, they were like, hey, on Thursday we'll build your profile, and then on Thursday we're going to send you like basically the babies, the embryos that we have available. And we're like, this is so crazy. It's like as if they're just fruit in a grocery store, like not a big deal to them. I'm like, this is wild, this is like a child. And basically, it was a Thursday. We're like sitting in our tax appointment, just like online and with our Zoom call. And I get this email, and all of a sudden I look and it just says, you've been matched. And basically, we open the email and it is a matched embryo to us. And what the email was like the mom and dad information and everything about them, their medical history, and everything about this embryo, the health of it, all the stuff. And at the end of the email, it just says you have 1 week to decide. And we were like, what? I literally thought it was gonna be like an Excel spreadsheet of like all these options. We pray about it. We're like, God, is this what you're gonna do? And then we're just like
I
face
thought I
to
was
face.
just waiting for more information.
Yeah, we're just like face to face with this child essentially, and it was this really crazy moment. And the child was half Asian, half Dutch, and it was like, oh my gosh, that's like crazy. Like I would give birth to a half Asian baby. Like it's just such a wild thing. But we felt called to this, and we're like, okay, Lord, is this what you have for us? And we prayed and we said yes to this embryo.
It
And
felt like there was so much confirmation too because in my dream, I felt like the child didn't look fully white, but it looked like kind of white. And I was like, if I had to guess, it would be half Asian, half white. And then we had no choice in the matter. And then we have all the, these senses of like, we have to find our baby. And so we're like going through that. And then we don't even have a choice. And then we get meshed with this child that could very much be the one in the dream, and it was just kind of a wild experience. And so we said yes.
Yeah.
And
The cool thing is God just brought so much peace about it. Like, it was obviously really crazy and like, what are we doing? Lord, is this what you want for us? But he just like brought so much peace in the yes. And it just felt like he was challenging us to trust in him. And it felt like we had so much more to trust him with, even considering the ethnicity and not looking like us, not being Caucasian, kind of can blend in with us. It was like, okay, Lord, you are in this and we are going to like trust you. And so basically we ended up having a transfer a few months later, where they transfer the embryo, and unfortunately the embryo didn't make it. And that was like just such a confusing moment in our journey where we were like, God, like we've said yes to you. We've said yes to where you're leading us, and it feels like we say yes to you. There should be no pain. Like there should be like the answer should be like this is it. And I think what was hard is like there's so many other things that are way too long for this video to share that just confirmed even like a lot of stuff with my health, like turning out to be better than it even was 2 weeks prior to be able to do transfer. It was like, what the heck? And so that was just like a really disappointing season that we walked in, and it was just asking really big life questions of like, God, what does it mean to like follow you and trust you when it feels like you almost just like lost our trust, and but we feel called to adopt, and like that is such a duh to us.
and like for me in that season, like I mean, for both of us, we were dealing with just intense grief, and it was just so hard. Like it felt like when that little baby was placed in Haley, like we're praying over this child that's in her, and like so excited, and with like the match of like, oh, like this could really be the child from the dream, and like I still remember those child's eyes in the dream. And so like when it didn't make it, like it felt like we lost a child, and it's like I've seen this baby. Like that's like how it felt. So it was like just I was like the darkest place I've ever been in my life those few days following that.
That was a crazy season. After that, we were encouraged just to take time, just like not think about even the conversation of fertility stuff. And that was just such a good advice we were given. So we just felt like God just said like November, and just to wait 2 months till November and just to like talk about things, but just keep it light and not revisit the conversation until then about what we were going to do next. And it was really cool because in those 2 months, it felt like we were just so confirmed of like this call of adoption that God gave us. Not that it was like our last resort, but it was like becoming our plan A, and it was like God's plan A for us. And so even in those months of like doubting, like, hey, what are we doing? Or even trying to kind of not think about it, but you can't not think about it. You're like, all I know is we're called to adopt. It's just, Lord, like, you know how we're going to do that next. And so it's wild. In the midst of those 2 months, very close to after getting that call about the embryo not sticking, we got a random call from someone who asked us like, hey, we're looking for permanent placement for my son's daughter, and we're wondering if you guys would be interested. And we're like, what the heck? This person didn't even know we were trying to have a baby, let alone like they're calling us and they're thinking about us first. And we're like, what the heck? And it's just crazy because literally that morning or like that week, I had prayed to God. I was like, God, would you just have someone call us with like wanting us to take their baby? Like, I'm just ready. I'm willing. I'm like, let's do it. And we get this call, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is wild. And it was like, okay, this is obviously not the right time. And we felt so confirmed that God said November. And it's crazy, like that child now has like an amazing home with the right people. But it just kept affirming, like, you've called us to adopt. And so we chilled and we relaxed until we hit November.
So then November hit, and on the first date night, we re-entered the conversation of what's next. And we felt like there were a lot of options. We didn't know if we were going to do embryo adoption again. We didn't know if it was going to be, private adoption, foster, or, there were just so many different things that were kind of up in the air. And we had zero direction as to where the Lord is leading us.
It was so overwhelming and honestly really scary and just felt really like stuck. Like that would be the feeling that I felt.
But then we kind of just decided, we had heard through a friend about this adoption attorney in Florida. And we were like, you know what, we don't really have any leaning of where we're going, so let's just go to the informational meeting. And then after we left that, it just felt like so much peace. Like we were both in tears, just like so excited for that even the attorney did what she was doing, because it's amazing work, but then like felt like we want to be a part of this. Like she works with moms and she like really cares for birth moms and like gives an opportunity to have a relationship with the birth mom, and like that would be so cool for it. Like we would love to know the birth mom and for the child to one day know where they came from and stuff like that. And so we decided to go down that path with that attorney, and that's the kind of where we're at now.
Yeah, that's where we're at. And without getting crazy into it, the week after we said yes to that, we got a call from a friend who had a friend who worked in a women's shelter and said, "Hey, I know someone from this shelter who wants to give it for baby tonight. We're wondering if you know anyone." And our friend calls us, and we are like, "What is happening?" Like we say yes to this. This isn't even from Florida, and this is a week later. Just like constantly, as much as it can feel, I feel like the Lord has really protected our hearts. It could feel like a constant disappointment of like, why are you like leading us all these places and like we don't know the answer. But I feel like he's protected our hearts and just continually reminding us through these things like, Haley and Tim, I have adoption for you and I do have a baby for you. Just keep following my lead. And so while that was a confusing moment and we sought it through and then just definitely didn't feel peace about the situation, it was just like, it was just conferring to us that like that was this direction we're going is where God has us. And so now we're here. You've probably read our prayer card, but if you look at that timeline, it basically just, we are in the waiting time. We've created our profile. We've done our home study. We've done a million interviews. We've done too much education and just so many things. And we say here and wait. And they say that it could take anywhere, between like tomorrow we could get a call to 9 to 12 months, could even be later. And we just don't know, but we are trusting in God in this process in the way we have already. And we'd really encourage you guys to come alongside us and pray. Now that you know this story, would you pray for us as we are waiting? And more importantly, would you pray for this baby that like God knows exactly who they are and has had them planned for us this whole time? And it would just be so cool if when we get to like tell you that we have our baby, to be able to look them in the eyes and be like, so many people have been praying for you, petitioning for your life because it matters. And so would you join us? We really, really appreciate that. Any closing remarks?
No.
Thank you guys. Did Moose come in? Yes.